Hello and welcome to One Tech World. I'm Lucy Watson, founder of Negotiate Like a Woman, and I'm going to be talking about the top 3 things that I see women get wrong about negotiation. Now, I'll tell you my own story briefly in a minute, but I'm fundamentally here because I've had so many talented and ambitious women tell me they're underpaid, not taken seriously enough, not given the respect they deserve, or not having their needs given fair consideration. And I believe that negotiation is a massively underrated tool for addressing some of that. And we should be thinking of it as a core leadership skill that we need to build and develop over time. And the main reason you're probably holding back when you walk into a negotiation is likely the fear that if you're too assertive, it might damage relationships that matter to you. And that, by the way, is an entirely rational fear. It's borne out by the evidence. Women do incur backlash risk when we negotiate. So don't beat yourself up about it. But the good news is that we can mitigate that risk. And I'll be explaining a little bit about how we can do that today. So my story, I had a corporate career at organizations like Barclays and Oliver Wyman until my mid-30s. I then spent 10 years as a co-founder of a tech startup. And I do have a solid grounding in negotiation theory. I did an MBA at INSEAD, in which I chose literally every negotiation elective going. But despite that grounding, I found it wasn't enough. Whether I was negotiating as an employee, whether I was negotiating as a founder with other founders or a founder to commercial clients, I kept finding that I would walk out of the room feeling disappointed with this sense that I just hadn't secured the value that, I felt I deserved. And, this wasn't a one-off. It was happening time and time again. It was a pattern. And eventually I thought, let's look into this. Let's find out what's going on. And what I discovered when I delved into the evidence was that negotiation is different for women and that we need to adopt different strategies if we're to secure comparable outcomes to our male peers. And this was quite a revelation to me. I realized that, had I known this 20 odd years previously, I would firstly be much wealthier today, but also I believe I would have had, different opportunities, because negotiation is about far more than money. It's about getting more of what you want and less of what you don't. So I believe it's an incredibly important career development tool. And now I'm committed to bringing that knowledge to as many women as possible. So, misconception number 1. Negotiation is a battle or confrontation. So, the trouble with this metaphor, which I see very commonly, is that if we walk in with this belief, we brace before we get through the door. Our body, our facial language screams nervous, fearful, and of course, first impressions count. And this is the literal opposite of how we need to show up if we want to project value. We want to walk in at least appearing confident, like we're in our comfort zone. And the other issue with this metaphor is it's really the wrong way to think about business negotiations. It comes from very much a win-lose mindset. Now, that might work if you're on holiday in some exotic bazaar and you're haggling over a work of art because you're never going to see the vendor ever again. But in reality, in business, we are almost always trying to increase the size of the pie to create a win-win scenario. So this contest metaphor is really totally the wrong framing. So how common is this view of negotiation? Well, if you look at the academic studies, and I find these, I find these really staggering. Men will actually very commonly describe negotiation as exciting or fun. They'll use metaphors like a game or a sports match. And the contrast with women couldn't be more stark. Women will instead talk of fear, scary, confrontational. And if asked to provide a metaphor, it tends to be something like, going to the dentist and having a really invasive procedure. I mean, I find the differences between the genders are incredibly stark, and I cannot think of any other leadership skill where you would see this drastic a difference. And I have also been out and tried to recreate this survey myself because the academic evidence is sort of pushing 20 years old. But what I have found, and this is 2026 data, is, nothing has really changed. The overwhelming largest response I had in my cohort was negative framing around fear, anxiety, power imbalance, and difficulty. So, this really is something that women struggle with. So if this battle confrontation framing is unhelpful, how should we think about negotiation? Well, my definition is really very neutral. I think of negotiation as just a conversation where people who have differing perspectives are trying to work something out together because they both care about the outcome. Now, if you think about it, surely that's what you do at work pretty much every day. Because really what we're talking about here is collaborative problem solving. So if we can just park that battle and confrontation and move to collaborative problem solving, then we have already made a massively powerful shift in the right direction. And the beauty of this is it also plays to our strength, because most women think we're pretty decent at collaboration and problem solving. And it massively down-regulates the fear factor and helps us show up looking more like we're in our comfort zone and projecting value. But is this just me? What's the evidence behind this? Well, if you look at the research, the qualities that you tend to find in expert, highly effective negotiators are ones like these. I talk of the 4 C's. So curious, that means able to see things from the other party's perspective. It's really a form of empathy. Creative, so that's the ability to come up with novel solutions that meet the interests of both parties whilst minimizing the collective pain. Collaborative, because you've got to do this together. You've got to work with the other party. And finally, calm. Now, admittedly, some women, including myself, often struggle with the calm, but I believe that's something we can work on. We all used to struggle when we, in our first role, when we did our first business presentations. And yet that's probably something today you take in your stride. And I believe negotiation is the same. It is like a muscle. We need to practice it over time. And, over time, we can get more confident and calmer at it. But the interesting thing about this is 3 out of those 4 C's are qualities that most women feel pretty comfortable about: empathy, creativity, collaboration. And that opens the possibility that negotiation is perhaps a skill that we not only have the ability to become okay at, but maybe that's something that women actually have the potential to become accomplished at. And actually, that's just what the evidence says. If you put women in the right conditions, we actually outperform. So our reticence and about negotiation, our fears that we might think women are no good at negotiation, men are better at it, it's absolutely not the case. If you put a woman negotiating on behalf of somebody else, typically an organization as a commercial negotiator, women tend in most studies to have slightly better outcomes than the men. And that's because you're removing the systemic bias. The issues come when we negotiate for ourselves, either as an employee or as a female business owner, because in those scenarios, we are asking assertively for money, and that is counter-stereotypical behavior. Sadly, for many centuries, men were the breadwinners. There was a certain nobility in asking for money, whereas women, we have been conditioned to be accommodating, selfless, communal, and therefore it's somewhat jarring. It grates when a woman makes an assertive ask for herself. But this has absolutely nothing to do with our capability and everything to do with conditions and systemic bias. So let's summarize. Negotiation is not a battle or a conflict. It's actually collaborative problem solving. And what that means is we already embody the core traits of expert negotiators. We just need to learn how to use those traits adeptly. On to misconception number 2. Negotiation is important, but occasional. Now, here's a woman who looks like she's having a rather awkward job interview, and she doesn't want to do this very often. Most people tend to associate negotiation with pay rises and promotions, applying for new jobs, or possibly, if you're a business owner, closing a sale. But that view of negotiation is actually underselling yourself, because in fact we all have small negotiations literally every day of our lives. You know, it could be when you're talking to your partner about who's going to stay home because your kid's sick. It could be in the office around who's going to do the unpromotable task of organizing the team social. It could be with your teenager around, you know, doing their fair share of household chores. And believe you me, even as a negotiation specialist, I still really struggle with that one. But it's super important that we recognize these small negotiations for two key reasons. Firstly, it's in those little ones where we practice and build the skills for the big ones, because we are doing things like we are holding boundaries, holding our ground, advocating for ourselves. And we're using the same sort of language that we can then apply in those big and critical monetary negotiations that happen less often. But even more important than that, these are also the conversations where we build credibility and gravitas, and we learn how to project our value. So think about it. Are you one of these people who says, oh no, you know, I don't want to rock the boat. It's easier if I do that myself. And all right, I'll do that for you. Because if we're not able to protect our own energy, to protect our own time, you know, we're telling the people around us that we don't value it. And if we don't value our own time, our own energy, how can we expect other people to? So those small negotiations are really the ones that set us up and help us project value. So when we walk into the big ones, we're more likely to secure our true worth. So here's an example. This woman, some senior important person is coming up to her and saying, oh, could you just blah, blah, blah for me? Now, on the left, this woman, by the way, is super capable. She has a great reputation. She's somebody who knows her stuff, who's known for that she always delivers. But on the left, you know, she's become this go-to person, and it's beginning to show. The volume of work that she's been asked to do is getting unmanageable. The strain is visible. And perhaps, you know, that vibe she used to project as being in control and taking everything in her stride is beginning to, you know, to show strain. And if she carries on like this, it's likely she might start to drop balls. And then people might no longer trust her as much as they currently do. On the right-hand side, now perhaps that AI hand gesture is a little bit abrupt, but she's probably saying something like, oh, I'd love to help you, and I know I've done so in the past, but currently my team is maxed out on XYZ strategic project. Perhaps we could grab a coffee though and brainstorm who else might be able to help you in the organization, or some alternative approaches you might pursue. So she's being super warm, super helpful, but at the same time, she's being very firm around her boundaries. So who out of these two women do you think is projecting the most value? And who looks like, when the next big opportunity comes up, who might be most eligible for a promotion? Misconception number 3. The way to get a fair outcome is to get robust benchmarks. Well, I am absolutely not saying you don't need benchmarks. Of course, you should never, ever walk into a negotiation without robust benchmarks. And that is, by the way, super easy to do these days. You know, AI has taken all the hard work out of it. Although I would say make sure you are getting robust benchmarks that are backed up by proper industry surveys and reports. Don't just ask ChatGPT what you should be earning, because ChatGPT, all the AIs have been shown to lowball women in their in terms of salary estimations. So we need to, and also when to tell your boss that this is what ChatGPT told you you're worth is probably not a compelling argument. So we do need to get robust surveys. But the point I'm making here is that is not enough, particularly if you're a woman. And that's because of the fact that we are more vulnerable to backlash when we ask for money, because that is counter-stereotypical behavior. And sadly, whilst it's not a great negotiation strategy for anyone, a man is more likely to get away with this. But there's another problem about it, because when we zone in on benchmarks, we just look at the inequity. We look at where we are today, where we want to get to, and we might even dwell on the sense of unfairness. But there's another party in this negotiation, and they're not thinking about your inequity. They're not thinking about, your concern that, you need to get to market value. They're thinking about all their priorities. Where do they need to take the business? What are their objectives for the year? How are they going to make their bonus? How are they going to make their next promotion? So if you want to get what you want from this conversation, you need to make your ask more about them and less about you. And here's a great example about this. Now, Sheryl Sandberg may be a somewhat contentious personality these days, but there's a fabulous example of this in her book. When Mark Zuckerberg was hiring her into Facebook, he made her a great offer. She thought, wow, I think that's amazing. I would love to take that. But she went and talked to her close network, and they said to her, oh my God, Sheryl, you have got to negotiate. So she went back to him and said, Mark, you realize you're hiring me to run our commercial teams. And so you really need me to be good at negotiation. So essentially, she negotiated not for the benefit of Sheryl, but for the benefit of Facebook. And in so doing, she made it far easier for Mark to say yes. And she did, by the way, get a much better deal out of it. So to recap, the three big misconceptions that I see around negotiation. Number one, negotiation shouldn't be seen as a battle or as a contest. We need to think of it as collaborative problem solving, which women are really well positioned to do, and it really is something that we can excel at. Number two, negotiation isn't occasional, it's an everyday activity, and those small ones shouldn't be neglected. They count and they set us up for the big ones. And number three, researching benchmarks just isn't enough to secure a good outcome for women. We need to make it about the other party, and we need to make it easy for them to say yes. So I hope this resonated. Thank you very much for joining me today. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have also got lots of events and programs planned for 2026. And if you'd like to be kept in the loop, just let me know and I'll set that up. Thank you.